Hey everyone, here is lecture number 2 in regard to memory. Our last lecture talked about memory systems and different types of long-term memory, and this lecture is going to focus on encoding and retrieval. And so just as kind of a quick review for you, remember that when we take information from our short-term memory and move it into our long-term memory, that's what we call encoding, and in the process of getting that information out of long-term memory is the process of retrieval. And so this PowerPoint or this lecture is going to talk about some different strategies and tips to make both the encoding and the retrieval process more likely to happen accurately. And then we'll also spend just a little bit of time talking about some problems that happen when it comes to memory and retrieval. So, encoding, the process of getting information from short-term into long-term memory. The most common way that we encode is through the process of rehearsal. Now, rehearsal itself has some different types. Maintenance rehearsal is simply the process of repeating information over and over and over and over again. I told you all the story about how I used to have spelling tests or spelling quizzes when I was in elementary school, and I would simply just write those words over and over and over again in a notebook, and so I could hopefully remember them for the quiz. If you're studying state capitals, for example, if you're studying vocabulary for a Spanish class, you might use maintenance rehearsal. You just repeat, repeat, repeat. And that works really well if when it comes time to retrieve that information, all you have to do is bring it back exactly how you put it in your long-term memory. And so for this rote memorization, maintenance rehearsal works really well. As you likely know, when you get into high school and you have these more complicated classes and these more rigorous courses, oftentimes teachers aren't looking for this exact carbon copy response of what they gave you. And so you may see a multiple choice question in an AP class, for example, that doesn't look exactly like the definition that was in the textbook or exactly like the notes in your notebook. And so when you have to apply information to new situations, to new scenarios, it's important that you understand that information forward and backward. And to do that, we often use what's called elaborative rehearsal. And elaborative rehearsal goes deeper. It requires a deeper processing of the information. It requires students to connect that material to something previously that they've already learned. And so to use elaborative rehearsal is to understand the material in a more broader way. And I have the following examples on this slide are different ways that we can try to implement elaborative rehearsal. Chunking, for example, is when we take lots of information and we break it into meaningful parts. Rather than try to think of all the different structures of the brain that we learn in AP psychology, perhaps it's more useful for you to focus just on parts of the hindbrain, right? The medulla, the pons, reticular formation, the cerebellum. Then maybe you'll memorize the different lobes, right? The frontal, the occipital, the parietal, the temporal. Then you think about different subcortical structures that we've talked about. You think about the hippocampus and the amygdala and the basal ganglia. And so you chunk the information into meaningful parts. Mnemonics are just memory aids. They are attempting to think of clever acronyms or slogans or rhymes or songs that allow you to remember the information because you think of something that's catchy, you think of something that stands out. Some students think, well, you're just having to remember something else. And that's true. If you try to create a mnemonic for everything, it doesn't usually work. So mnemonics they work really well when you're trying to remember the sequence of events or when you're trying to remember lists and things. Mnemonics often help for that type of information. Method of loci is when you mentally imagine a place, maybe that's around your home, maybe that's around your school or your town, and you put information throughout that place. And so when you're trying to then remember information, you just cognitively walk through your house, walk through your neighborhood, walk through your school, and you can picture the pieces of information throughout those different parts. It's a very common way to try to remember long pieces of information. And then encoding specificity is this idea that when we encode, when we take information from short term into long term, we also encode aspects of our internal and internal self and our external environment. So if you're studying AP psychology and you are calm and relaxed, then you'll be more likely to retrieve that information if you are also calm and relaxed. That's the idea of state-dependent memory. Context-dependent is the external, the environment. If you are studying AP psychology while sitting upright at a desk in a well-lit room, then when you're trying to retrieve that information, you should try to match that same context. So let's say that we've got that information into long-term memory, and now we got to try to get it back out. Well, retrieval is just the fancy word for remembering, and there's a couple different types of retrieval. We have what's called recall, and recall is plucking it out of thin air. It's like an essay question where you don't have a lot to pull from. You don't have a lot of what we call retrieval cues. Whereas recognition, you have lots of retrieval cues, and you are simply trying to identify the correct information, usually among incorrect information. And so you can think of that like a multiple choice question for recognition. Recognition lasts longer. You may forget the names of some of your classmates when you go to the 20-year high school reunion a long time from now. But if you were given a list of a bunch of classmates 20 years from now, you could likely circle the names of classmates from a list of a bunch of names, even if you couldn't draw those names, from blank or from nowhere. Serial position effect is what that chart is on your screen right now, and it's simply the idea that we are more likely to remember things at the beginning and at the end. We tend to forget the stuff in the middle. So this review video, for example, perhaps you'll remember the first couple of minutes of the video and the last couple of minutes of the video, but forget the stuff in the middle. That's what we call the serial position effect. When you remember the things at the beginning, that's known as the primacy effect. It's the first thing that's there. Your mind is ready and open to learn. When you remember things at the end, it just happened. It's very recent. It's what we call the recency effect. And then mood congruent memories, students sometimes confuse that with state dependent. The idea behind mood congruent is your current mood, you are likely to then pull memories that match your current mood. So if right now you are in a great mood, you'll probably be reflecting on other times where you've been relatively happy. Whereas, and I think we've probably all experienced this, if you're feeling kind of down, if you're bummed, it's easy to think about other things that are upsetting because our memories are often equal or congruent to our current mood. And last slide, some problems that happen with memory. So the idea of memory reconstruction, like that phrase, memory reconstruction, is the idea that memory is not like a videotape that you can just rewind and play back with perfect accuracy. Every time you retrieve a memory from long-term memory, you manipulate it. And it's possible that you forget some things. It's possible you can add some things from a schema. And so memories are like Play-Doh. You're constantly manipulating and reconstructing them. And we talked a little bit about Elizabeth Loftus and how she helped demonstrate the idea of memory reconstruction and false memories through some of her experiments. Having people watch a video of a car crash and then asking things like how fast were the cars going when they bumped into each other or smashed into each other, and people actually remember what they witnessed differently based off of those kind of priming questions. Interference is when two memories are interfering or conflicting with one another. We have what's called proactive and retroactive interference. Remember, proactive interference is when old information is getting in the way of trying to remember something new. You get a new cell phone, but all you can remember is your old cell phone number because you had that old number for 5 or 6 years, right? That's proactive interference. Whereas retroactive interference, the new information gets in the way of something older. So you are learning capitals of different countries. And last week you learned all the capitals of the countries in Asia. And this week you're really focusing on Europe and you're having a hard time remembering Asia now. That's the idea of retroactive interference. The new information's getting in the way of the old information. And then finally, amnesia. Amnesia is not like a normal element of forgetting. Amnesia is when something's gone wrong, right? Usually something has gone wrong structurally with the brain. And there's some different types of amnesia. Anterograde is a type of amnesia where you struggle to make new memories. And so imagine a person who gets into a skiing accident, and then from that day on, they struggle to form new memories. That's anterograde. Whereas retrograde, these people, it's like you wipe the hard drive clean, where maybe you get into a skiing accident and then you look around, you're like, I don't know who I am, where I'm from, what my job is, who my friends are. That's the idea of retrograde amnesia. So, real quick overview. When we did this in class, that was a 3 days worth of lecture. I hope it helped refresh your memory over some of these concepts. And as always, if you need any help, shoot me an email. Good luck.